Welcome to the Recharge Zone podcast. This is your host, Brent Doty, joined by my co-host,
Ann-Margaret. Glad to be here.
And we're going to be talking about the first annual EAA Summit. So this is an event that just happened here in Bexar County where we had a lot of folks, stakeholders around the region, elected officials, and we talked about the Edwards Aquifer and the associated issues. So we'll be listening to that today and making a few comments as we go along.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, fellow residents of the Edwards Aquifer region, I am Bill Taylor, your friendly weather chief from KENS 5 Television. So glad to be here. It's an honor to welcome you to the inaugural Edwards Aquifer Summit Luncheon. We've all come together to gain valuable insights into our region's primary water source and the critical efforts towards sustainability and towards conservation. Today we'll delve into the heart of the Edwards Aquifer Authority's mission. We're going to learn about the stewardship of the aquifer. It's serving more than 2.5 million people across 8 counties. And as we all know, that number will be rapidly increasing. Now, to begin, I do have the pleasure of introducing a very distinguished leader in water resource management. The general manager of the Edwards Aquifer Authority is Roland Ruiz. A very special thank you to you and your team, Roland, for putting together this essential report and our event. We're all eager to hear what's in store for future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, Roland Ruiz.
We need to think about how we keep this mission alive in a new and different way that looks to the future and starts to think about how we preserve all the good work, all the investment of resources, time, money, and people that in the early days struggled with putting in place this regulatory program to protect and preserve the aquifer system. And so we started looking to the future and we started to think about what lies ahead. And we see all the population growth. We see the uncertainties around climate and what those changes might mean. And so we started thinking outside the box is what we started to do. And we started to say, we can't do this alone. We need more people. We need more partners. We need to collaborate more, and hence those 3 words. We need to include more people, and we need to start imagining outside the box. And once we start those ideas rolling, we need to think about innovative ways that we can put them in place. So you're going to hear some of that today. You're also going to hear about this present drought and how we're managing through it. And that's what we do, really, don't we? We manage from drought to drought, through drought, and then we get to the next drought. And that's just the reality that we've come to know. Going back to the historic drought record in the 1950s, that kind of gave rise to groundwater districts across the state of Texas, including our predecessor agency, the Edwards Underground Water District. So that's what you're going to hear today. You're also going to hear about some of our science programming. The other core element to what we do is science and good data. We take that and we build a regulatory program. We take that to our board and we present that to them so that they can make the best decisions around policy. We're trying to eliminate the politics of the issue and bring the best available science to the forefront. And I think that's been important and will be increasingly important as we move forward. We inform not only our board, but we do that at the state level. We do that anywhere and everywhere that we can. But science has to drive our work, and you'll see how that's happening now and will continue to happen. And then the other thing you'll hear about is our habitat conservation plan. And what is that? That is really the plan that puts in place how we're going to comply with our statutory requirements that was critical in the creation of our agency. And that is how we're going to comply with the Endangered Species Act that gave rise to litigation, that caused a whole bunch of turmoil back in the early 90s. And the Habitat Conservation Plan does that because we've identified how we're going to maintain continuous minimum spring flows. The good news is that the drought, the most recent drought prior to this one, the one from 2011 to 2014, which looked an awful lot like the drought of the 1950s in intensity, we survived that. Springs didn't go dry. They continued to flow. And it's proof, evidence that the programs can work. And so you're going to hear about that in our process now that we're going through to renew that that plan, which comes up for renewal in 2028. We're starting that program now to renew that and get another incidental take permit from the federal government, so that we know how much we have and that we have it of a good quality. The journey towards certainty, and how can we bring more certainty around the Edwards so that everybody benefits, and that journey continues as we go into the future. Can we achieve certainty? Can we do it in a credible way through science? And can we ensure that this water resource remains sustainable for all uses and users well into the future? And we've captured all that in what we call the next generation of our mission, and you'll hear some about that. But we're talking about legacy programming. You all are part of that. You have been a part of that in your various operations and work, whether you know it or not. If you manage a water supply, if you manage a city's water supply, your own water supply at your house, you're a part of that. And I want to just close as I pass the baton to the next speaker. One of the things that makes this whole region unique in terms of awareness and ethic about water, you can turn on your television set every night, every afternoon, and not just Ken's, but every TV channel gives an aquifer level report. That doesn't happen anywhere else that I know of, anywhere in this country. But it happens here. And so that speaks to the conservation ethic, that speaks to the awareness that exists across this region. We can't take credit for it because it has happened over the last generation as the issues around the Edwards kind of came to the top. And we've taken that, used it to our benefit. And I just want to thank y'all for being here, because by you being here, you're demonstrating that you're interested in the work and that you're willing to kind of roll up your sleeves and help us with it as we move forward.
All right, so that first part of the summit, we heard from Roland Ruiz, the EAA General Manager, and he was giving an overview of the summit. Basically, he talked about the next generation concept, which is really the strategic plan of the EAA moving forward into the future as we face challenges from a changing climate, challenges from a greater population here in the SA metro area and the EAA region, and just challenges of the uncertainties of the future. So Roland mentioned three important aspects, three words. He said innovation, imagination, and inclusion. So those are the three guiding principles of the next generation. And essentially, we're going to have to think outside of the box if we're going to overcome some of these large, complex problems. So that's where the imagination comes in, and innovation. And inclusion, basically, we're going to need stakeholders. We're going to need a diverse group of employees and staff and volunteers and researchers to find the solutions we need to manage the groundwater.
And I would say, along with the innovation, imagination, and even inclusion, some of the partnerships that we've forged over the past few years, such as the Education Outreach Center with Morgan's Wonderland Camp, and then all the research that y'all are doing at the FRP kind of really speaks to those collaborative efforts, right?
Exactly. And then Roland went on to talk a little bit about the drought that we're in and continuing on. So this current drought is one of the most intense droughts we've ever had. And in terms of lack of rainfall and high temperatures, it may be the most intense, second only to perhaps the drought of the 1950s, which had a longer duration. So we're starting to see some relief now. We're hoping it keeps up, but I'm glad Roland mentioned that, because it is an important factor of the EA. Why the EA is here is to help mitigate groundwater withdrawals during drought.
Mm-hmm. I think it speaks to the success of the critical period management and all the work that we kind of put forward to make sure that the aquifer, stays in good condition.
Absolutely. And he outlined that was going to be one of the topics today, as well as a bit about our science program and a bit about the EA HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan. So, and Ann-Margaret, Roland also talked about how unique it is that we hear about the aquifer every night on the nightly news, the weather segment. And I can tell you that is very interesting. I've been all over the country. I went to college in Idaho. We have a very important aquifer out there too, the Eastern Snake River Plain Aquifer. Yet you don't hear about it as much on the news. You don't see the levels of the aquifer. But when I came here to San Antonio, that was one of the first things that I noticed. There on the news, they had the water levels from J17, and that really did impress me as well. So He's right. The citizens of San Antonio are particularly aware of how important this aquifer is, and it shows in even the nightly newscasts.
You know, one of the things Roland brings up, and it is a great part of our newscasts, and people do expect it, is the level of the J17 well every day, every newscast. And I think about the amount of people who get here from all over the country and are wondering, what is that? What is that all about? So grateful for the Education Outreach Center. How many of you have been in this facility? The Edwards Aquifer EOC. Oh man, you've got to go. It's an incredible experience. Our children are getting field trips there. They're learning with a tangible opportunity to see what the aquifer is and what it's all about. A couple of takeaways. First, Roland, the fact that you're saying science has to drive our work. Thank you.
Our host for the summit was Bill Taylor, one of the local meteorologists here in San Antonio, and he's referencing the Education Outreach Center, which a lot of the constituents and stakeholders and city representatives may or may not have known about, but we have a free Education Outreach Center that's open to the public. It's for all ages, all abilities, and everything in between, and it's where you can come and learn about the Edwards Aquifer and the Edwards Aquifer Authority. So some of the work that we mentioned here is also referenced there at the center with STEAM exhibits. That's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And so we kind of have everything there with, you know, species, aquarium, endangered species, and videos and things that you can watch of EAA staff in action doing their work and doing their part to manage, enhance, and protect the aquifer.
Yeah, it was really great for Bill to do this for us, and he also produces a weekly customized weather segment for the EOC. It's so cool. It's the weather at the EOC, and it plays at the EOC, so
yes.
pretty fun.
Yes, it very much, and we're so thankful for that, right?
First up, we're going to hear from Deputy General Manager Marc Friberg. He plays a pivotal role in the authority's mission to protect and manage the Edwards Aquifer from a regulatory and permitting perspective. Next up, we will hear from Marc Hamilton, the Executive Director of Aquifer Management Services, detailing his team's work on pursuing scientific research and gleaning proven insights regarding the Edwards Aquifer. And finally, we conclude our presentations with Scott Storment, the Executive Director of Threatened and Endangered Species. Scott's team supports the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan, which is integral to ensuring the long-term health of the aquifer's unique ecosystem. We begin with Marc Friberg. Marc?
Everyone's talking about the unprecedented levels of drought that we're having right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our critical management plan. And if you're a permit holder out there, you know what that means. It means a curtailment of your permit. It means drought restrictions, and I'm going to go over a little bit of this. We're going to start with the San Antonio region. So if you are a permit holder anywhere other than Uvalde County, this applies to you. And the way our critical period works is as our index well J17 or some of our spring flow goes down, permit curtailment goes up. We're already in 4. We've been in 4 for quite some time. What that means, and this is a bit confusing, it doesn't mean that you're at the full % reduction because we're in 4. It also has nothing to do with your restrictions on how you use your water. It's not a lawn watering restriction. We don't work that way. As our restrictions are put into place, the restriction is on your permit. How you go about meeting that restriction, or that reduction of your permit, is up to you. And a lot of cities put in their different ordinances and their different lawn watering restrictions, their pool filling restrictions. How you meet your reductions is up to the individual permit holder. What's important to the EAA is that you reduce the amount that you used because your authorization has been reduced. Right now, we're at a 29.3% reduction in the San Antonio pool. I know we're in stage 4, but we haven't been in stage 4 for the entire year. That's why it's a lower percentage. If we project things out to the end of the year, if nothing changes, your permit will be reduced by 37%. And that's significant. We've never had that high of a percent reduction in our permitting history. And so we're here to help you through that. If you need to find additional water by the end of the year, please call us. We can help facilitate that. Our board of directors recently passed a rule that allows you to use an extra month to try to find that water. You have until the end of January to find additional water. In a best case scenario, you've put in place conservation measures to help you meet those reductions already. The other side of our house is the Uvalde pool. So if you're here and you have a permit in Uvalde, you go a little different. You go off a different index well. It's only the well. There's no spring flow restrictions out in Uvalde. It's a J27 well. And the reason for that is the aquifer acts differently there than it does here. Right now in the Uvalde pool, we're at a 13% reduction. If things remain the same, it's going to be a 20% reduction by the end of the year. And the same thing applies for any permit holder in Uvalde. Please call us. We can help facilitate you finding additional water, or we can help you with your conservation measures to help meet your reductions. One of the other things that we're doing, and it's associated with the Habitat Conservation Plan and the spring flow measures that are contained within that. If you've heard anything about VSPO, the Voluntary Irrigation Suspension Program option, it's a program that is put in place to help protect spring flow, and at the same time it helps bolster aquifer levels. We've what we call trigger that program this year. We triggered it last year, and what that means is in October, the J17 well is at a low enough level that we're concerned enough to pull more authorization off the table. This year we took 41,795 acre feet of water off the table, which means we reduced authorization across the region by that amount. We're doing it again for next year. So this year and next year we'll reduce almost 84,000 acre feet of authorization over the 2-year span. And there's a bit of confusion about how VSPO works. It's not what you may hear in the agricultural world as a dry year option. It doesn't prohibit agricultural crops or agricultural use of a permit. What it does is it reduces the amount of water that's authorized to be used throughout the region, which through modeling and through our other understanding of how the aquifer works, it will bolster spring flow and aquifer levels in your region. It's interesting as we talk about the intensity of this particular drought. VSPO triggered back to back, and that's never happened in recorded history. On October 1st of any year, even going back to the drought of record, we were not this low in October. This program never would have triggered back to back. It only triggered 3 times in the drought of record, and it was always spread out with at least a year in between a trigger. But that's the bad news. The good news is we're here to help you. We've got programs in place that we used from 2011 to 2014, and we're going to use them again until we can get out of this drought, because the rain will come again. I'm going to turn it over for better news to Marc Hamilton and let him talk a little bit about some of the other things that we're doing.
So Marc Friberg is the first speaker after Roland, and he talks a lot about our critical period management plan. So basically, and we've talked about this on the podcast a few times, but it's the way that we reduce our pumping during droughts. So as the drought gets progressively worse, we increase our restrictions on pumping all the way down to 44% in a worst case scenario. So we mentioned earlier that we're coming out of stage 4 into stage 3 now. That means we're loosening that a little bit, and folks can pump closer to their regular permit. But it's good that Marc went over that for both the San Antonio pool, which covers the San Antonio area and the eastern counties, and the Uvalde pool, which covers Uvalde County.
And I would also like to note, too, this is something that I think it was good for a lot of the stakeholders, constituents, and city reps to be a part of, is that people kind of sometimes have the misconception that we regulate how you can water and when you can water and things like that. But we don't do that. We just simply regulate the permit that they have to pull water from the Edwards Aquifer.
Yeah, we're not out there telling people when and where to water their lawn and stuff like that, but we'll tell purveyors, hey, you have to reduce pumping by 30%, and then it's up to the purveyor to come up with that amount. That may come in the form of restrictions like on your lawn watering, but it may be other types of restrictions. But we ultimately care about the final numbers, the final withdrawal on the permit. So this is also kind of a unique in terms of groundwater management. Other states, they'll have like a junior and senior water rights, where the junior rights are newer. So when you have a drought, those are the first rights to be curtailed, and they get completely shut off. So only the senior rights are allowed to be used during more severe droughts. But here, everyone is on a level playing field and everyone has these same withdrawals. So we can all continue to use water that we need, but we all face the same kind of restrictions. So it is kind of unique.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you all. I appreciate very much the chance to get to tell a little bit of our story today. So as Mark mentioned, I'm Marc Hamilton. I'm Executive Director for what we call Aquifer Management Services. That houses our modeling, our research, our sustainability, and our data collection programs. So we have a staff of about 30 total that do a lot of really interesting and meaningful work. So without further ado, the Edwards Aquifer, and we all hear about it every time you turn on the news, and thank you, Bill Taylor, for that. Where is it? Well, it's in total about 22 counties, and if you break the aquifer down into its three components, in the north you have what we call the contributing zone, the recharge zone, and the artesian zone. So by far the largest component of the system is the contributing zone, and that's really significant because all the rain that falls out there contributes both to the Trinity Aquifer, but it also contributes to stream flow and surface water flows. It contributes to spring flows that maintain surface water flows. Those surface streams across the blue section, the recharge zone, and contribute water to the Edwards. And then ultimately, all of that recharge is stored in the artesian zone, so the bottommost portion of the aquifer. So when you break that down into the different components, you can see we got about 3.5 million acres of contributing zone. We have about 780,000 acres at the surface of recharge zone, and then we wrap it up with about 1.3 million acres of artesian zone. So when it comes to managing the system, Marc Friberg talked a little bit about our critical period measures. Those are incredibly important. They're also could easily be viewed as a big tool for sustainability. But what most people don't understand, those reductions are based on a lot of data that goes back into the 1930s. Those numbers weren't just guessed at or pulled out of thin air. We had a lot of people over a lot of years, starting back in the early 2000s, we built our first modular groundwater model. That model could not have been built if we didn't benefit from the forethought of a lot of people back in the 30s and 40s and 50s. All of that data was used to construct and calibrate and validate that model. And then that model has since been updated, recalibrated, and revalidated. But all of that is used and that modeling work is done so that we can protect spring flow and drought record. So if we have a repeat of the drought of 50s, our modeling tells us that, oh, these are the different measures that need to be in place to maintain flow of one same markets. What's next? This is the good news part. So, Roland, I think, mentioned, and I think on your tables you have some information that speaks to what we call next generation. Next generation to us is it's a big deal, and we're pretty excited about it. And I would tell you that in my last 35 or 40 years of working for a living, it's the most interesting and exciting work I've had a chance to be a part of. So what does that really consist of? There's not enough time to really go into great detail about next generation, but I can hit a few high points. One of those things, one of the focal points of next generation really is a better understanding of what's the impact of conservation land and how important is that and how can we continue to be a part of that. We've worked with the city of San Antonio for a number of years helping to evaluate some of their Edwards Aquifer Protection Program lands. And as a result, I think, of that relationship recently as 2019, before any of us knew about COVID, they offered to give us 150 acres on the recharge zone so we could conduct groundwater research. We didn't argue with them at all. So we're very appreciative of that because we have what we now call our field research park, and that's really become quite a hub to conduct groundwater related research. But it's also been a great place for us to build a lot of collaborative partnerships and to contribute to the educational component. And if you really think about what we're all going through in relationship to water, we're really all in this together. So it's nice to have a facility and a place where we can do that. We can come together and talk about these problems. We can talk about what we're doing and share that information with others. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the work we're doing at the research park. But first I want to give you a few numbers related to how much conserved land or protected land we have. Not we, the EAA, but across the region. Different entities hold these lands. So by county, kind of get a quick feel for, as far as we know, that from the data that we've been able to find, there's about 250,000+ acres total across our region. So, and the city's program has been very effective in the western counties, Uvalde, Medina, and Bexar County. We've been fortunate enough to acquire a couple of easements. The EAA has, and both Comal and Hayes will participate in some easements as partner. Okay, so the field research park. What is it? Where is it? Why is it? This is 100 of the 150 acres at the research park, and again, we don't have time to go into great detail, but it's located on the research farm, northeast Bexar County, adjacent to Cibolo Creek. And it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to learn more about how the system works. The more we understand, the better we understand the system, the better we can manage the aquifer for sustainability in the future. Just give you a little bit of information about it. So this is what we call monitoring area number 2. We have a number of different land management practices that we're conducting on that land. The idea behind those practices is to do things like improve soil health, to improve the depth of the soil, to slow down the runoff, to keep the sediment out of the streams, keep it on the land surface, and give surface runoff a little bit more chance to hydrate the landscape. We think and we hope that that has opportunity to benefit the groundwater system in our region. The hard part of that is trying to understand how to quantify it, and we've gone down that path and started down that path, but it's going to take a while. It would help a lot if it would rain. It would be easier to measure the impact of rainfall. So this is a typical conservation practice that we would have. We have 3 of these at the FRP. This is called a conservation terrace or a berm, so it doesn't matter. It's simply a very shallow excavation that's meant to slow down surface runoff, kind of like a speed bump. You install a lot of additional vegetation, woody vegetation, and different kinds of plants with a focus on native vegetation with deep roots that can survive these droughts. But those roots have a big impact on the health and quality of the soil. They help to put more carbon into the soil, making the soil more amenable to infiltrating water when you do get a rainfall event. One of the things we're doing to try to better understand the impacts of these things is we drill boreholes across them, and we've got some tools that allow us to go in and look at changes in the soil moisture between the surface and the water table, which technically that would be the beta stone. But we want to see over time, do these structures really have a significant impact? Can we quantify that impact? And if we can, then there's opportunity perhaps to kind of apply that very low-tech solution across the region. And maybe if we're fortunate, we can have a positive impact in the face of things like climate change and drought. I'll wrap up with some of the other extremely low-tech structures that we're examining and trying to quantify their impacts. A lot of the other work is done with rock. We have plenty of that available. There's things called one-rock dams. They're kind of misleading. The goal there is it's one rock high. It's just a hydraulic jump. We put these in areas where we have a lot of erosion problems. It slows down the runoff. It traps all your organic debris. It traps your sediment. It gives the water a little bit more time to soak into the ground. You still get runoff, and that's fine. You should. But the idea is to have clean runoff when it goes to the creek so that when we have storm events, our creek runoff isn't full of sediment or suspended solids. And we have other things. The middle picture is called a rock rundown. That's really designed to both prevent erosion and prevent the loss of soil moisture. And then finally, we have a rock berm, which functions basically identically to a berm and swale. It's just designed, because they're on hillsides on the steeper slopes, and it's designed to slow down your runoff as well, allow more time for sediment to collect and all that. So just to sum it up, all these conservation practices and objectives and sustainability goals are really interesting. It's going to take a lot to quantify those. I think we should bear in mind too that the more land we're able to conserve, perhaps that's the low-hanging fruit until we have time to do the science behind quantifying these different kinds of practices. So that's all I have. I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Storment, and he will talk to you about the habitat conservation plan.
So the next speaker up is Marc Hamilton. I'm sort of biased here because Marc is my boss, but I thought Marc did a great job explaining the research and science program behind the EAA. So at EAA, we believe in science-based policy. That is to say, we believe in having research and scientific principles uphold our regulations, our policies. We want our policies to be based in actual facts about the aquifer. So Marc does a great job just overviewing how we do that and how we plan to do that, continue to do that in the future.
Mm-hmm. And Brent, as the research manager, can you kind of talk about maybe some of the latest research that you're doing potentially at the Field Research Park?
Yeah, and Marc touched on all of this. We're looking at the effects of different land management techniques, such as using simple rock structures, simple earthworks to slow, spread, and sink water and increase the amount of recharge to the aquifer. So we have a series of studies going on right now to help quantify that. It's never really been done in terms of quantifying how these things work. But if it turns out to be a positive impact on the aquifer, we hope to incentivize it region-wide. So what I was mentioning earlier, the science-based policy, Marc actually does go into that a bit and how our current policies were based in science, such as, the total amount of water that we have available and why we do the critical period management a certain way. So it's all based on how the aquifer actually naturally recharges and functions and how it's affected by drought. So it's pretty neat that he went into that. And he also went into some of the existing programs to protect the aquifer, such as the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, where the city has set apart funding since the year 2000 to purchase development rights and conservation easements over the recharge zone and contributing zone of the aquifer.
Good morning. My name is Scott Storment. I'm the Executive Director of the Threatened and Endangered Species Program. My day-to-day title is I'm Program Manager for the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan Program. Let's see if we can get in here to our... The EACP, the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan, was a permit that was let in 2013, but it was a permit that was put together with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There are 5 permittee partners on the permit itself: the City of San Marcos, the City of San Antonio through SAWS, the City of New Braunfels, Texas State University, and the Edwards Aquifer Authority. These 5 entities make up the permittees that are underneath this permit. So that the Habitat Conservation Plan, though, was not born with just this permit. It was born with decades of work from a whole host of stakeholders, local community activists, mayors and educators, academia, environmental groups, as well as more institutional type stakeholders such as city government and municipal utilities. The end result was a plan that was put in place. This permit is a 15-year permit. The permit is intended to basically provide protection and conservation protection for species that are in the Comal and San Marcos Springs systems, their habitat and the species themselves. I'll get to the species in just a second. But that is primarily done through spring flow protection measures, which some of these have been mentioned. Marc Friberg mentioned the VISPO program, which is a program that, forbears, asks farmers under leases to forbear water usage during certain spring conditions, certain flow conditions that are too low or in a drought like we are currently. That program helps provide adequate spring flow for the springs in Comal and San Marcos, on the Comal and San Marcos rivers. That's very important because that's the crux of what we're doing as far as these programs, is the habitat and the species have to be protected because they're considered endangered and threatened under the Endangered Species Act with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that was what compelled the regional action to come together under this permit, and that's what's compelled the partners to continue to work together as a EACP, as a plan, and as a permit. Okay, now the incidental take permit, the ITP, the incidental take permit covers 11 species. Those species are threatened and endangered. Now, I'll point out the primary ones that are kind of the simple species that everyone tends to maybe have heard of. On the far right here that's the Texas blind salamander. If you're in this room and you haven't heard of it, you haven't been in San Antonio very long, because this is the most well-known species that is protected by the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan. The plant in the middle is called is in San Marcos. It's our San Marcos Texas wild rice, and Texas wild rice is a species that is only known in the San Marcos Spring system, and it's gone up and down. But under our program, it's had tremendous success, and we're very pleased with the success. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services as well. Here, this small minnow-looking fish is called the fountain darter. It's found in both the Comal Spring system and in the San Marcos Spring system. So it's one of the few species that's found in both systems. But these are just a sample of the others. There's other invertebrates and other bugs and critters that are involved in the permit that I won't go into because they're not as high profile as far as their relevance to the discussion today. But the activities that the permit covers, we cover groundwater withdrawal, such as the VISPO and the Spring Flow Measures Program, recreation, water management operations, and conservation activities. These are the types of programs that fall under this incidental take permit that the permittees work on. This shows the boundaries of the Edwards Aquifer Authority, and the Habitat Conservation Plan follows the exact same boundaries. So we work all the way from Uvalde all the way up into San Marcos. The spring systems in New Braunfels and in San Marcos are where the majority of the conservation measures are utilized for the plan. There are three types of conservation program components. There's the habitat conservation measures, which are predominantly done in San Marcos and in New Braunfels. That they have to do directly with the species and the habitat that we're working with. The spring flow protection measures, which are the programs like VISPO, which you've heard of, predominantly deal with the western part of the state, the western part of the region, as far as where irrigation and irrigation use is done in the VISPO programs. There's another program called ASR, which we won't get into. But those terms, if you've been around this program, you've heard VISPO and ASR. Those are spring flow protection programs. There's supporting measures, and supporting measures are important. The most probably important one that we talk about is the refugia, and the refugia is a backstop for species within the region, and it's basically where as a refugia meaning refuge. The refugia is created in the San Marcos Aquatic Resource Center, the San Marcos National Fish Hatchery, which you might have seen before. there is a backup of, we've developed and housed species like the fountain darter, the Texas blind salamander, the San Marcos salamander, Texas wild rice. We have developed populations of these species so that if something horrible happens, say a drought of record where the springs actually went dry and the species died because their habitat died, that we could, at the right time, when we could reintroduce those species into the springs and allow those species to come to, repropagate and create another stand of fountain darters, for example. We also, so there's the species that have been developed in San Marcos. There's also a backup to the backup, and the backup is in Uvalde at the National Fish Hatchery. So Uvalde also plays a very vital role. So the whole region is impacted by this program, not just the spring systems. The backup to the backup to the backup is a well thought out, important program that gives you a sense of how important these species are, because they're indicators of the health of the aquifer as it expresses itself in these spring systems. One item that we're undergoing right now that's really important that you need to be aware of is, for the past, since about 2020, 2021, we started an effort to basically do a permit renewal, because our current incidental take permit ends in March of 2028. As of 2028, we want to start a new permit. And the new permit would not look radically different than what we currently have as far as the conservation measures that it will cover, the types of supporting measures that it will cover, the types of spring flow protection measures that it will cover. We anticipate something similar, but it will be new and improved. It will be version 2. And it will be not for 15 years, it will be for 30 years. And the challenge with a 30-year permit, though, is that you have to factor in climate change. And climate change is a reality that we have to live with. I think Bill touched on it well when he said that that climate change is affecting us no matter where you come from on the spectrum. Climate change is happening, and we're not debating the source, we're debating the fact that it is. And what is the impact in my program on the habitat and species? And what can we do to mitigate and minimize that impact as much as possible and protect the species for the long haul? So we're working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We've got committees in place that manage the program itself. We're doing robust stakeholder engagement so that people can have a chance to get their input to this process and to what we're developing. But as this is just a timeline. It lays out kind of in a Gantt chart type fashion what the program looks like. We're looking to have a draft application that will go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in late 2025, early 2026. So we're in the middle of that process, and there's a lot of work that's going on. My staff, I have a staff of 5. We work full time on this. We manage the day-to-day operations of the current permit, but we're putting a tremendous amount of time and effort on the new permit that we're trying to execute with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The same permittees will be on that permit. That's what's expected, and so we'll see how things develop. But I feel very confident that that will happen. It's just a process that takes time, and there's lots of boxes to check as we go through a federal process. So anyway, that is the basics of the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation.
All right, so the panel was ended out by Scott Storment, who's the Executive Director of the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Program. Scott talked all about what the HCP is and who the stakeholders are. So, we've had everyone on the podcast before, but essentially the EAA HCP is to protect the threatened and endangered species that are in the Comal and San Marcos Spring systems in and around that area. And Scott talked about some of the protection measures, such as restoring the springs and, saving water, like through critical period management and through some of the other programs that have been discussed during the summit. But he also talked about the importance of the stakeholders themselves, how vested these folks are in the spring systems, and how we could really not do it without them.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like you're mentioning, that all of the different facets of the HCP program, right, Brent? Like the different things that they do to protect the species aren't just, it's like environmental type protections, right? And like,
There's spring flow protection measures and something else I don't know.
What's the one where they do the land next to the springs?
That's the restoration, but I don't know. They have a word for it. Can't think of it.
Maybe we should talk about. I know he probably talked about it, but maybe we should just touch on the fact that they're doing the permit renewal.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So Scott Storment also talked about the ITP renewal, and that stands for Incidental Take Permit.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, that's the permit from the Fish and Wildlife, National Fish and Wildlife Service, the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, that essentially protects the region from lawsuits over the protection of the species. Because to get one of those permits, you have to demonstrate that you're doing basically everything you can to keep them viable and healthy and alive, while still being able to use the resource. So that's where the HCP comes in. The HCP really is the biggest part of that permit process. But the next permit starts in 2028. That's when our current permit expires and we renew into a new one.
Yeah, and I think something good to note that I know Scott mentioned was the different partners within the HCP, right? So it's the city of San Antonio buying through the San Antonio water system, the city of New Braunfels, and then the city of San Marcos. And what's the other one?
Texas State University.
Oh, yes. So I think it's good to mention that, right? Like we talk about partnerships and how we're kind of moving in that direction. Well, we will have this continued partnership and hopefully decades-long permit renewal, right, with this.
Absolutely. It really, and Roland's touched on this a few times, maybe even during the summit, but it's that permit that brings certainty in terms of groundwater protection and conservation to this region. It allows Texas to continue management of the aquifer, and it prevents any kind of lawsuits or federal takeovers or anything like that. All right, so that was the end of the first annual Groundwater Summit for the EAA, and hopefully we'll continue to do this. I think it's great for the stakeholders, elected officials, to really get in the weeds a little bit, so to speak, about the EAA and why we exist and what we do. They're very busy. They have a lot going on, but I think it's important enough for them to sort of get a reminder and an overview of why we exist and what it's for.
Yes, and to be able to, like you said, meet us face to face and potentially even ask questions to some of our leadership. I think that's kind of gold across the board.
Absolutely. What we're looking for is open communication and greater stakeholder engagement across the region, and I think this was a positive step forward.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. Have questions, ideas for topics, or things you would like to share with us? Well, reach out to us at rechargezone@edwardsaquifer.org.